I was assigned female at birth. I was in therapy, and at first, I just kind of didn't put any label on my gender whatsoever. I get misgendered anywhere I go, really. Pronouns are the words we use to talk about other people when we don't use their names. So words like she and her, he and him. So my pronouns are they, them, theirs. I once had a customer call me over to his table and he was like, "Oh, what did your mother say when you cut off all your hair?"
Hi, my queer family. I'm Javier Lopez. Hope you're all safe and sound. Today, we will be discussing misgendering with Phil, the importance of using the right pronouns, what to do if you make a mistake, and some advice and resources available. If you know someone who wishes to change their pronoun by which they refer, for example, from she to he, try to understand it's very important to them that you respect this, even if you initially find it difficult to consider them that gender. Deliberately using a different pronoun for the person will be experienced as offensive, judgemental, and hurtful. Most trans people will use the most common pronouns, he and she, to refer to themselves. However, some people may use the gender-neutral pronouns they and their in the singular sense. Okay, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Your time and for joining us today, Phil. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself to begin with, just who you are and what you do, and then why you decided to talk about this topic and why it means so much to you right now?
So obviously my name is Phil. I was assigned female at birth, but about 2.5 years ago when I was 26, I was in therapy, and there I was like talking about my gender, and with the help of my therapist, I sort of came to the realization that I'm not female. So now I don't identify as male or female, but I am quite masculine. At first, I just kind of didn't put any label on my gender whatsoever. I was like, I'm just a person. But now I use the label trans. I would also say I'm genderqueer, but I tend to use transgender more. So yeah, that's a bit about kind of my background. I work in a restaurant day to day, and that's kind of why, or what inspired me to talk about this, was because I get misgendered a lot at work, but not just in work. I get misgendered anywhere I go, really. But yeah, my passion is kind of like talking and writing about mental health and gender, and like I'm currently writing an ebook. So hopefully in the future I can not have to work in a restaurant and I can do something a bit more passionate about.
Awesome, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Cool. So what is misgendering for the ones listening that might not know the term?
So normally it refers to using someone's incorrect pronouns. So pronouns are the words we use to talk about other people when we don't use their names. So words like she and her, he and him. So my pronouns are they, them, theirs. So if I got misgendered, it would be someone accidentally using the word she or he. But misgendering is very nuanced, and it's not just about pronouns, it's about other words. So it could be terms of endearment like love, dear. It could be words like sir, madam, but also just people making kind of assumptions about you as well. So for example, working in a restaurant, I once had a customer call me over to his table and he was like, "Oh, what did your mother say when you cut off all your hair?" Because I've got like really short hair. So obviously if he perceived me as male, there's no way he'd ask that question, because it's quite common for men to have short hair. So in doing that, he was obviously saying, I see you as female. Most mothers probably wouldn't want their daughter cutting their hair. So he was asking me about her reaction. So even though he didn't use the word she, I was still misgendered in that moment. So that's kind of what misgendering is.
Okay, thank you. So going about that story, what happened at that moment? How did you react? What did you do? Tell us a little bit more about that.
He was much older, from a very different generation. He was sat with his family, and I think his granddaughter possibly felt a bit embarrassed, because I think maybe she was a bit more clued up and possibly knew, not necessarily, but I think she maybe got a vibe that she knew I was kind of neither male nor female. So I think she kind of like awkwardly like sort of sat there, and I just answered his question. I was like, oh, she, you know, she didn't hate it, but she wasn't that happy about it. And it was just one of those situations where, being at work, I'm quite open about my gender at work, even with customers. I'm happy to have those conversations. I'm even happy to call customers out who use the wrong correct pronouns. I do it in a polite way, but I have to remember I am at work, and I don't want to kind of cross a line where I sort of confront a customer so much that I then kind of get in trouble for it or whatever. So had that have been outside of work, I probably would have given him a little bit of a hard time, be like, why are you saying that? You know, I'm not a woman. But on that occasion, I just thought, I can't be bothered. So I just answered his question and kind of like moved on.
Okay, so in that particular case, things like the environment that you were in kind of repressed your personality a little bit and what you would have done outside of that. So you obviously said that if you were in a different space, you would have probably said something else, which means that by what you're saying, you had to limit yourself and adapt yourself because you didn't want to get into trouble at work, right?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily saying I would have got in trouble, but yeah, I am very, very conscious of, like, the second I put on my uniform, I'm like at work, I'm representing this brand, and I think you have to be a lot more careful.
Okay.
You know, outside of work, I have nothing to, well, for me personally, as a very privileged, in the trans community, I'm at much more of the privileged end. Obviously, I'm white, you know, relatively slim, stuff like that. So for me, as a trans person, I feel quite safe. So I personally have no issue with confronting someone outside of work in these kind of situations. And that's also just my personality. Like, if someone says something that doesn't sit right with me, I don't hesitate in confronting them about it. But at work, obviously, I'm there to kind of make sure the customer's happy. I don't want to make them feel too uncomfortable. So it's not ideal, but that's personally how I feel in the work environment, that I have to be a lot more careful. If I am going to call anyone out for misgendering me or challenge them on anything, I have to be a lot more careful about how I do it.
Okay, thank you. You were talking about pronouns. So why are pronouns important to you, and why do you think people should use the right pronouns?
It's just about validation, I think. So they're important to me because when someone uses my correct pronouns, that's them saying, I respect your feelings, I respect how you identify, I acknowledge how you identify. So yeah, it's very insulting, you know, if people aren't trying with your pronouns. And it's basically the equivalent of just someone using your incorrect name. So you've told me you're called Javier, and if I was just like, oh yeah, I just spoke to Bob, you'd be a bit like, why are you calling me that? So
I'll be like, excuse me.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same as using someone's name. And you know, transphobia is very, very present in current society. And if you don't care about using people's pronouns, or, you know, you're not willing to correct yourself, you might not think it's that big of a deal, but those small acts of being disrespectful accumulate to much bigger transphobia on a larger scale. So the small acts of transphobia at the bottom leads, like, imagine like a pyramid, it leads to greater acts of transphobia, like hate crimes, murder, stuff like that at the top. So it is important to respect people's pronouns and think about the bigger picture.
Okay, thank you. So in the example that you gave us earlier about being at work and somebody not using the right pronouns, or just simply talking about your hair, assuming that you were female, How often does that happen in and out of work?
It varies. So sometimes, like, I can go 3-4 days without being misgendered, and other times I will get misgendered 3 or 4 times within a day. So it does vary. It definitely happens on a weekly basis, like without fail. And like which environment I'm in depends on which way I get misgendered. So outside of work, I get misgendered a lot more as male, like sort of 90% of the time male, and then inside of work it tends to be more female. But yeah, it kind of, I don't know, maybe like 5 times a week, but sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less.
And do you feel like you need to tell these people off, call them out, educate them every time this happens? Obviously, you mentioned a little bit earlier what happened at work, but do you feel obligated, or do you feel like you have to educate people on the spot?
When it first started happening, I didn't have the courage to, and then I spoke to about it, and he was just like, just call them out, like, you know, you're not doing anything wrong by doing that. And I was like, yeah, he's got a point. So I started doing that, and it got to the point where I would call people out every single time it happened. And then the virus hit, and I went on furlough, and I was out of work, like still had my job, but I was on furlough for maybe about 5 months. And then since I've come back to work, which has been a couple of months now, I don't know what's changed, but I kind of have stopped calling people out. And the first time I went back to work and got misgendered, I think I was just kind of too anxious to say anything. I was so out of practice because I spent a lot of lockdown with my boyfriend, who's fantastic with my pronouns. So I kind of, you know, and obviously not going into shops as much and things like that, misgendering was happening a lot less. So I was kind of out of practice with it. So when I came back from lockdown, when I went back to work and started getting misgendered, I didn't really have the courage to call people out. But now it's kind of got to a point where I'm not saying it will be like this forever, but right now I kind of just can't be bothered. It's effort, and as someone who has anxiety anyway, it is anxiety provoking to call people out. So just because I do it doesn't mean I find it easy at all. Like, it's anxiety provoking. But sometimes it's just like, it's easier to let it go. If it doesn't bother you too much on that particular occasion, I'm sure other like trans people must get it, where sometimes it's just like, you know what, I just can't be bothered. I don't have the energy right now.
Yeah, of course. So you said a minute ago that you kind of lost practice since you came back to work. Does that mean that you felt like you were doing it mostly as a habit and routine instead of actually and proactively wanting to stand up for yourself and educate people?
Not really. It was literally just the fact that, you know, before lockdown, I was at work 5 days a week, and I'd very much got into this habit of doing it and wanting to do it, to like stand up for myself. Because if you think about it, like if you think about cis people, so for anyone listening that doesn't know what that means, like cis is short for cisgender, which means you're not trans. So it means your birth sex and your gender identity align. So, you know, if a cis woman went into a shop and got called sir, I can't imagine for 1 minute she would tolerate that. And equally, if a cis man got called madam, you know, they'd be like, what the hell? So it shouldn't be any different for a trans person. Whether you think I look male or female, why should I have to tolerate being misgendered? So, you know, I was at this point where I was calling people out, again politely, but calling people out a lot. And then I went from that to not having to be in work to spending the first 10 weeks of lockdown with my partner, who pretty much never misgenders me. So it's just all of a sudden I just didn't have to do that. So it was just that. It was just, I got out of the practice of doing it because I didn't need to do it. And then all of a sudden I got thrown back into work in a restaurant where, you know, I'm meeting tens, if not hundreds of strangers a day, and all of a sudden the misgendering starts again. So it's just a bit like, oh, I haven't had this for 5 months. So that's all it was really.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about privilege and about being white and about being slim as well. How have you used that privilege to, you know, to your advantage, or have you used that privilege to get out of a particular situation or to help another person in the past?
That's a good question. I'll be honest, probably not. Like I try and talk about these things on social media. So obviously with everything happening with Black Lives Matter, I'm trying my best to kind of regularly post ally tips on how we can support Black people, and Black trans women are very marginalized against and murdered regularly. So I try and like raise awareness of that. But other than that, I don't know that I've actually been in a situation where I can specifically use that privilege. And if anything, like it's only minor, but if anything, because I was thinking about this when I started getting misgendered as male, I thought, oh, I wonder if I'll start experiencing like the equivalent of white male privilege. But I don't think I've been in a situation where I have done actually. And if anything, again, only to a very minor level, but if anything, it's been the opposite. So I've had experiences where usually, like for example, if I go on a walk, like I'll smile at the people I walk past, and then as my appearance started to change, as I started to present more masculine, I'd find a lot of people wouldn't smile back at me, especially kind of middle-aged women.
Oh,
And
right.
that I know that's a really small thing. And for example, I know people of other races will have like way worse experiences than that. But that was something that I became quite acutely aware of. I was like, wow, these people are starting to treat me differently. And I went into a shop recently, and for the first time, I was kind of like, I had the security guard keep a close eye on me, which is something that never happened when I presented as female. And that really wound me up. And again, people of colour must get that all the time. So I understand how privileged it sounds to even complain about this as a white person.
Yeah.
But I don't feel so far, I'm not saying it won't ever happen, but so far I don't feel I've benefited from sort of passing, if you will, as a white male. If anything, it's kind of made things ever so slightly worse. Not that much worse, but yeah.
Yeah, it must be a really tough situation having to fear, for your own safety because you just want to be yourself. Having to be outside and fear for your own safety because some people might not understand who you are or what you're trying to do or how you are expressing yourself.
It's
Obviously,
difficult.
sorry,
Sorry.
go on, go on.
No, it's difficult because trans people talk about this a lot and their safety. And I am so privileged as a trans person that I believe them and I empathize with them, but I don't know what it feels like, because even when I was female and dressing, or thought I was female, I was dressing very masculine. Sort of tomboys are a lot more accepted in society than if a man walked down the street in women's clothing. So if a man walks down the street in a dress, everyone's going to turn and say something or whatever. You hope that they wouldn't, but that's the reality. Whereas if a woman walks down the street in men's clothes, it's kind of no one makes a big deal out of it. So even when I'm walking past people, even if they do think I'm female, no one's really got an issue with it. And again, I am white and relatively slim and stuff like that. So it's kind of, I feel, if any, actually, sorry, going back to your last question, no, sorry, I should have mentioned it. There is one way I've definitely benefited from potentially passing as male, and that is I feel much safer walking around at night. So I wouldn't know statistically who gets more attacked, whether it's men or women, but in my head, I don't know, in my head, I think, oh, as a man, I'm safer. That's just kind of how I see it. I'm less likely to be a victim of sexual assault, or I'm less likely to get mugged or whatever. And again, I don't know if statistically that's true, but that's just kind of how I feel. And so at night, especially, when you walk past people in the street and it's dark and you can't see them as well and things like that, I think I definitely probably look like a man to most people. So when I walk home in the dark, I actually feel safer, because I think, oh, they'll think I'm a man and therefore they'll leave me alone. So yeah, I'm surprised I didn't remember that. But yeah, that is definitely one way that I think I've kind of benefited from like adjusting my appearance and stuff like that.
Why do you think society is so against transgender?
I think it's kind of two reasons. I think one reason is just, it's something that if you haven't been through it, you can try and understand, but you're never going to fully get it. And ignorance fuels hate. And so if you were ignorant about trans people and what it means to be trans, you will obviously get some people who are very accepting and will be like, look, I want to learn about this. But quite often, and it's not just to do with gender, quite often with lots of things in life, if you don't understand it, it causes people to dislike it and to insult it and to hate on it. So I think that's part of it. Lack of education, I think, is another one. So lots of people are falsely under the impression that being trans is like this new thing or this new trend, when actually trans people have existed for thousands of years, like they've existed as long as cis people. So I can understand, if you're sort of some middle-aged conservative person and all of a sudden you start hearing about trans people, again, if you are unaware that trans people have always been around, I can understand why you might get funny about it. It obviously also massively challenges the gender binary, and lots of people are under the impression that like you are a man or a woman, and they don't realize that gender is a social construct, and they're like, it's science, you're born that way. So then when trans people come along and say, well, actually it's all made up, and your genitalia isn't linked to your gender, and actually it's a social construct, and if the world is ready for this, we can dismantle it and we can change it. And I think so many cis people, to them that seems like such a radical idea that they find it quite threatening. And they probably think it just sounds like preposterous, like, what are you talking about, like, how can you get rid of gender, like everyone's born male or female? And it's like there's just not enough education on it. And then I think finally, I think the media plays a huge part in it. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Disclosure on Netflix, but even as a trans person, I found that really eye-opening. Having them talk about all these films that had portrayed trans people in such a negative light, which I was unaware of because I wasn't around when those films came out. Cinema has a lot to answer for. The British media is very transphobic, so it's no surprise whatsoever that the kind of people who read particular newspapers in the UK, like the Mail, things like that, it's no surprise that the public then adopt very transphobic views, because that's what's being fed to them. And even, again, with people like J.K. Rowling being very transphobic, someone with that much of a following, if she's someone you look up to and she's spreading this transphobic rhetoric, no wonder so many people are like, well, I admire this person and they're someone I listen to, so why would they be wrong on this? It's just, I think there's so many different angles where like transphobia stems from. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I totally agree with you in the sense that the media plays a massive role. And yes, I saw Disclosure a while ago, and it was really sad and eye-opening, as you mentioned, because when I was watching it, I was like, wow, like if this type of thing comes out now, that will be the end, people will be outraged and everything, because you before didn't know better than you do now. All of these things in the past were, in brackets, okay for everybody, because we didn't have as many transgender people, we didn't have as many gay icons, as many people from our own community out there to tell us that it is okay to be this way and it is normal to be this way, instead of having to make fun of somebody on TV. Because most of the time the gay person or the queer character ends up dead or raped or something like that. Something really bad usually happens to that person. Things are slowly changing, but they could be changing a little bit faster.
Sure.
So it's good having these shows that talk about history and what happened. I always try to go back to the beginning when everything started in Stonewall and everything, because this was the people that built that bridge for us.
Mhm.
to actually continue with the work that we are doing right now. So I do
Yeah.
agree totally with the media, and it could be better. We're getting there, but we could do a better job, and they could do
Yeah.
a better job as well, definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So going back to misgendering, and
Mhm.
let's use that same example that you mentioned earlier about work.
Mm.
What do you think people should do after they use the wrong pronoun, and then you say, "Hey, I'm sorry, my actual pronouns are this. Could you please use them?" And they might not take it well, or they might get all defensive. What do you think people actually should do, or what's the right way of accepting and taking this information, because they might not understand even what you're actually saying to them?
Yeah.
So what would that be for you?
Yeah, I've never had someone, certainly at work, I've never had a customer get defensive with me. I've had a few people look a bit confused, but I think if you don't understand what the person is saying to you, just ask them. Like, I always word it in the most easy to understand way. So instead of saying, "Oh, they're my incorrect pronouns," I don't trust that everyone knows what the word pronouns means. So I'll just be like, "Oh, sorry, I don't identify as female." So there's no way you can kind of not understand that. But I think if you're getting defensive, and this doesn't just like link to gender, this could be about anything. If you're called out for anything, racism, homophobia, transphobia, anything, I think it's really important to have a conversation with yourself about why you're getting defensive.
Mhm.
Like, you need to check your privilege and understand, like, because your fragility is playing up, and you need to kind of look at that and understand where that's stemming from. um I think if a customer of mine was called out, they always go to apologize. And that's nice, that's nice that they are obviously apologetic for upsetting me. But actually, what I think is better than that is thanking me, or thanking the person. At the end of the day, I personally don't require an apology. You haven't misgendered me on purpose. I don't need you to be on your hands and knees, apologizing. But just thank me. Just go, "Hey, thanks for letting me know." I think there's lots of situations where it's better to say thank you than sorry, because when you say sorry in that situation, it then puts the onus back on the trans person to console you and go, "Oh, hey, no, it's fine, don't worry about it." When
Totally
actually,
agree with that. Yeah.
but actually, I shouldn't have to say, "Hey, don't worry, it's fine," because it's not fine. You have misgendered me and you have assumed my gender. So I shouldn't have to console you. It's not the end of the world, but that's not my responsibility. Um, and so, if you say thank you, it's kind of like it's a way of apologizing, but without the other person having, again, to console you. And it lets them know that you're grateful for the information, that you're not going to do it again. But yeah, generally, in terms of misgendering someone, the sort of correct protocol is like, you can say sorry. Like, I personally don't require an apology of people, and sometimes when people do say sorry, I'm like, "Hey, look, thank you, but it's fine. You don't need to say sorry." But it's then about correcting yourself. That's the most important part. So, for example, like, let's say I was at work and someone was like, "Oh, Phil says she wants to come out with us after work for drinks." What you don't want to do is turn it into this massive scene. You don't want to be like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I just got your pronouns wrong. I can't believe I keep making that mistake. I'm never going to get them right. I'm so, so sorry." Because it's embarrassing enough to be misgendered. If you then give this really over the top apology, it turns the whole conversation into being about the misgendering, and then people will start to turn around and be like, "What's going on?" And it just makes the trans person feel even more embarrassed.
Yeah.
So a much better way to deal with that would be, like, for example, if someone said, "Phil says she wants to come out with us after work for drinks," what you would do instead is, "Oh, I mean, Phil said they would like to come out with us for drinks after work. Where should we go?"
And move
So
on.
right, and literally, like, get in, get out. That's the most important part. I think cis people think that they need to, like, be really apologetic, but it's literally the opposite. Like, you can say sorry, fine, but if you're going to say sorry, just say that. Keep it very succinct, very genuine, and just be like, you don't need to be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Just say sorry, repeat the sentence with the correct pronoun. That's super important, because until you do that, it's like the misgendering is still up in the air. Like if you call me she and then you don't correct yourself and you just carry on talking, to me, that says I still see this person as female, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas if you correct yourself, you've acknowledged my pronouns, and it lets me know that you know I don't identify as female. Yeah, it lets me know that you acknowledge my gender, and then by carrying on with the conversation and saying, oh, where should we go? What time should we meet up? It moves the conversation very swiftly on. So you're not making the misgendering a whole focus of the conversation. So just say sorry, correct yourself by repeating the correct pronoun, and just move on.
Do you think the feeling for people to say I'm sorry and apologize that much is more of a cultural thing, British thing?
Could well be. British people say sorry a lot, and for things that they don't need to say sorry for, and it's something that I've definitely been guilty of myself before. It's hard to say because I haven't traveled enough to kind of know how much that word gets thrown around in other countries and other cultures. But yeah, I definitely think it could be part of it. I think also part of it is just, at the end of the day, you have made an error, and human beings, when they make an error, tend to say sorry. And again, it's kind of quite often it's taught to us to say sorry instead of to say thank you. But I think it's important we move away from that. Like if I'm at work and a customer has had to wait at the till for ages to be served, people will go, oh, sorry about the wait. And I think, but why are you saying sorry? It's not your fault if we're busy. You don't need to say sorry. What you do say is thank you for waiting.
Thank you for waiting.
Because it makes them feel good about themselves, and also you don't owe them an apology. You can't help it if we're really popular. So by saying thank you, it's acknowledging the fact they've had to wait, but in a much more positive way. Whereas when you say the word sorry, it has a negative connotation that puts people back up. So if you're meeting up with a friend and you're like, I'm sorry I'm late, they're a lot more likely to be like, yeah, I've waited ages actually. Whereas if you're like, thank you so much for waiting, they're like, you know what, it's okay. So I think that's part of it, and just the guilt as well of like knowing you've misgendered someone and how that might make them feel. I think that makes people say sorry. But I think if you haven't realized that you've misgendered someone and they point it out to you and like, actually these are my correct pronouns, again, I'd repeat yourself with the correct pronoun, but also say, hey, thanks for letting me know, thanks for reminding me.
Okay, so let's move on to London Trans Parade. We had the second parade this year. Sadly, I wasn't there. I was there last year, but I couldn't this year. With everything that's going on at the moment with the pandemic and people, having to shield themselves and taking all these measurements and everything, what are your thoughts on people still wanting to spread the word out, but still at the same time putting themselves at risk?
Oh, in what way? Do I agree with it, or?
Well, what are your general thoughts on this? Because on one side, they want to, the ones that wear the parade want to continue spreading the word, but at the same time, you are socializing with people outside of your household, outside of your bubble and things like that. And none of these parades usually end up in Soho, and then there are bars around, and then people might have a few drinks. It might get a little bit, more complicated to handle.
Yeah.
And get out of control. So one thing can take to another one. So it doesn't happen all the time. I wasn't there. I'm just generally speaking. And I want to hear your thoughts on that perspective, if you have anything to say.
I think I hadn't given it much thought, but for example, when I saw the Black Lives Matter protests, and you'd have some people complain, it'd be like, oh, there's a virus, they shouldn't be doing it. I couldn't agree with that at all. I was like, they have every right to protest. I was like, pandemic or not, like, they're being murdered. They haven't been treated correctly for hundreds of years. Like they don't have a choice. Even if there is a pandemic, like they have to go out and defend themselves. and they wouldn't be doing, like, this is the thing, the people who got annoyed about it is like, well, if you treated them right in the first place, they wouldn't be out there spreading the virus, and I guess it's the same with trans pride. Like, if people respected trans people, if trans people had the same basic human rights as cisgendered people, if trans people weren't being murdered and things like that, then we wouldn't need a trans pride, or it would have a much different take. It would just be a celebration rather than a protest. And if it was just a celebration, then maybe we would go, hey, you know what, we can skip it this year because of the virus. But what people either sometimes don't know or forget is that pride is a protest. Pride isn't, some people go for a nice day out, but generally pride is not this party. It's protesting, saying we are not treated the same as everyone else. This is not fair. And so if trans people, because I did, when there was trans pride and stuff, I saw things on social media and I did think I'd love to be there. And the only reason I didn't really go was because I was also spending part of lockdown with my parents, and because of their age, they're like a high risk group. So I personally didn't feel comfortable with it. But, I saw it and I wanted to be there. And I think, you know what, you might be cross that we're spreading the virus, which potentially kills people, but you're killing us by murdering us. And this is the thing lots of people don't know. Trans people get murdered, like especially black trans women get murdered a lot. So I do understand people's concern of, there's a virus, we should stay indoors, but at the same time, it's like, until you start treating us better, you don't really have, I don't think, much of a right to kind of contest that. And you also have to remember that people are going out now anyway. People are going out just to get drunk and see their friends and things like that. So it's like, at least when we're going out, it's with a purpose. You can't pop down the pub and then complain about trans people going out to protest.
Yeah, I think what it might be confusing for people is like, is that purpose big enough for you for not for you, but in general, for people to actually be out there and potentially putting the other ones at risk? Because if they get somebody sick, that person might go back home and then spread the virus there to their parents, and then something might happen. We don't know that.
I think your average person probably wouldn't know that it's that important, but anyone who takes the time to go and do research on the discrimination against trans people, not just murdering, but like hate crime, work discrimination, things like that, I think anyone who actually makes the effort to go and learn about it will then realize that actually we're quite within our rights to do that. But don't get me wrong, I definitely think people going to those protests need to take responsibility and like wear face masks and take sanitizer with them and stuff like that. They do. I'm cool with them going, but yes, they absolutely have to be responsible if they're going to do it. I don't agree with someone going and not wearing a face mask and stuff like that. I think that's not cool.
Yeah, totally. And don't get me wrong with this, but one of the things that you shouldn't do if you are talking to somebody outside of your household is, speak face to face to that person. In these parades, as you know, people are protesting and they are angry and they are, tired of being misgendered or being mistreated or being killed and being murdered, that they want to let that out somehow. So people are out there screaming their lungs out, wearing the mask, of course, but nonetheless, doing something that they shouldn't. And again, don't get me wrong with all of this that I'm saying. It's just for the ones listening. So I think there is this sort of like fine line or gray line, because they have a purpose, which I totally agree with, but there's also this other thing that's happening at the same time. So it's like, which side do we choose? Because when BLM started happening and all the movement as well this year, I wanted to go out. I wanted to protest. I wanted to do something about it. I just didn't want to stay at home and do nothing and just simply put up a post with a black square. I didn't want to do that. But at the same time, I was thinking about my partners. I was like, I can't put them at risk.
Yeah.
But then I had that dilemma in my head that I know a lot of people listening might be having as well, hence why I've been asking these questions and hearing your thoughts from your perspectives as well. So it is great to hear your opinions on this as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like it does come back to I think it's privileged to be able to say I'm not going to go, because it's like, as a white person, it's privileged of me to say, you know what, I'm not going to go and protest against, for example, Black Lives Matter. Again, I would have loved to have been there. If I wasn't staying with my parents, I would have quite happily put myself at that risk if I was living by myself. But with them being old, I didn't feel comfortable with it. But it's privileged to be able to do that, because it's like it's an issue that, yes, racism obviously affects society, but as a white person, it doesn't affect me in the same way, obviously. So it's kind of like, I think the black people, I think, see it as, well, we don't have an option. We, even if we don't want to get the virus, we have to go out and protest against this, otherwise our voices won't get heard. And I think it's down to each individual to make a decision whether they go to these protests or not, whether it's trans pride or Black Lives Matter. But yeah, when we think about not even protecting my parents, again, I'm like, well, I want to protect my parents, but there's some black people out there whose parents have been murdered because they're black. So to go, oh no, I'm not going to go, again, I think we're very lucky to be able to do that. But yeah, I do understand people's anxieties around it. Like that's a good example. I think if it's something where you would find that situation very anxiety provoking, then you're going to have a panic attack or whatever, I totally get you not going. I think it's just different for each individual person.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned a couple of types and anxiety, which ties to mental health and taking care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have for someone that just started that transitioning process, and they don't know how to deal with all the constant changes, and they don't know how to deal with the mood changes and things like that? I cannot really say much because obviously I have not experienced that, but
Sure.
I want to hear from you what your advice would be in that case.
I think with anything in life that's difficult, I just think talking to people is always a massive help. So I've had therapy on and off for like the last 10 years. I'm in it now. I'm a massive advocate for like counseling and therapy, if that is something that you are able to access, which I appreciate not everyone can, but if you can, I think that's of massive help. And if you can't, just talking to friends, family, people who get you, and will take the time to listen, but also finding an online community. I have no trans friends in what I call real life, but I have people I talk to online who are trans.
Yeah.
And who get how I feel, and people who are non-binary and things like that. So I think if you are active on social media, making the effort to follow different people who are gender diverse can definitely help. I know that's helped me. Yeah, if you can, obviously, if you can find real life friends who are also gender diverse, absolutely do that, and go to events and things like that. But yeah, I think it's like anything mental health. You could meditate, you could keep a journal. I write blogs, so I've written lots of blogs at different stages since coming out about how I felt about different things. And for me, writing is quite cathartic, so that's helped me. It could be make a podcast, talk about your experiences, just anything. But I think if you just keep everything to yourself, I don't think that's going to help. So just let it out somehow.
Yeah, totally agree. I think opening up about yourself is the best way to open that door for others to actually share the stories as well. I always say that as much as possible because I believe by doing that, you're like setting that path and saying, hey, it's okay. You can come and talk to me. I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to bite you. I'm just being myself. And then you can just be yourself after that. So I totally agree with that, with the part about opening up and then sharing yourself and your own story. I wanted to ask you about your story and when you were growing up, if you don't mind answering
not
the
at all.
question. How was that for you, growing up? Did you know what you wanted? When did that start? When you first thought about gender and what you might want to do with it?
There's lots of kind of like stories about trans people out there of like they know when they're like 2, 3, 4 years old, like mummy, I'm not a boy, I'm not a girl, that kind of thing. And it wasn't like that for me at all. So, like I said, assigned female at birth, became like a tomboy probably from like 4 onwards. Just started wearing boys' clothes, playing with boys' toys, hanging out with boys at school. So I've always been like masculine, but I literally just saw it as that. I was like, I don't even know that I thought about it like being a woman that much, but like I always thought, female, but just a tomboy. And then I probably got to maybe like, I don't know, maybe my early 20s, and I came across the term gender fluid, and I looked that up one day and I thought, oh, it kind of sounds similar, but like not 100%. But I wasn't on a big quest to like figure out my journey. I think it was just literally a word I came across one day and was like, oh, that's interesting. And so in my early 20s, I started to become more interested in gender. Would watch documentaries about transgender people. Again, never occurred to me that that's what I was. And then like I changed my name to a traditionally male name. Again, still didn't occur to me at that point that it meant anything deeper than that. I lost connection with my birth name, which was like a woman's name, and so I was just like, yeah, I don't want to be called that anymore. But again, didn't put the 2 and 2 together. And then anyway, like I said, I had this sorry, go on.
I was just gonna ask, so when you decided that you were gonna be Phil,
Yeah.
you still didn't know what that meant?
No. So I was given my birth name, which Phil was an abbreviation of that. But I'd been called Phil for so long, like since I was about 10, like I started getting called that as a nickname, that by the time I got to, I can't remember even when I changed, like 24, I think 6 years ago. So when I was 22, I reached a point where I was like, I never use my birth name. I feel very comfortable with Phil because it is a very masculine name and I am masculine. Literally, the only time I used my birth name was on like, if I had to fill in a form or something like that. I was like, I find it cringy. I have no emotional connection to it anymore. I am Phil. That's the name I've grown into. It just makes sense to change it. So I changed it. And I knew it was a traditionally male name and I knew that I was masculine and therefore it felt very comfortable, but I still had no idea that that meant anything more than that. And it's something that my boyfriend and I now joke about, that like, how could you have not known, sort of thing. But yeah, so I was in therapy and I was about, how old was I, 20? Yeah, I think I just turned 26. And I had one session and my counsellor and I were talking about my years of like being a tomboy and what it meant. And he just turned around and he said, what gender do you identify as? And I'd never, ever been asked that question. And I remember exactly what I said to him. I said, I 100% identify as female, but I feel 90% masculine. And then the easiest way to describe it is like, it wasn't like a switch had been flicked. It wasn't like I suddenly was like, oh, I'm not a woman. But it's like, imagine you've got a line of dominoes and it's like that question was the first domino being pushed. And then within about 2 weeks of thinking about that therapy session, thinking about my masculine behavior over all these years, just thinking about all of that, I can't explain it. I just had an epiphany. And one day I was like, oh my God, I'm not a woman. And so that's kind of how I figured it out. So I was very much like a late bloomer, didn't realise until much later on in my life, didn't realise till adulthood. But that's kind of how it went down.
Well, I mean, obviously cannot imagine how it felt when you knew that you were going to be Phil, and then that from that point onwards you were going to be yourself. The only way I can describe it is when I was doing some research about polyamory, because I'd struggled with that a little bit as well. I was reading some books about it, and then at the end of one of them, there was a sentence that said, it's okay to be this way.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I felt like validated and accepted
Yeah. Yeah.
so much. So I can totally understand your experience when your therapist told you and asked you what gender you are, because it was like that eye-opening moment when you actually, are okay with who you are, or in your case, you were started to discovering who you
Yeah.
actually were. And those moments are valuable and they
Mm.
mean so much. But in my case, it meant so much because I think that was the moment when I actually accepted that
Yeah, it's like life changing.
yeah, exactly, that I was this way, because you know all that time prior to that moment, I was having these battles in my head because I didn't know if this was okay. I didn't know if this was possible. And even to this day, I still sometimes have struggles, not so much.
Yeah.
So so I'm sorry, I'm just kind of like moving away from the topic.
Also, can I ask, so when you, if you don't mind me asking, like when you were growing up, did you kind of, even if you didn't know the specific label, did you kind of realize that you were polyamorous, or is that something again that you discovered later on in life?
I discovered, I didn't even think about it when I was growing up,
Mm.
but going back into my, when I actually discovered that term polyamory, and I started going back in my mind and memories, I was like, shit, I've been polyamorous for a long time.
Right. Yeah. 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 I had the same thing. So I didn't think about my gender in that way growing up, but now I look back on so many things. I'm like, oh my god, makes so much sense.
I
Yeah.
know, because in my case, I've never been single,
Right.
right? I've
Right.
always had someone else, and the way that always happened is by having an affair. I didn't
Okay.
know what else to do. I didn't
Hmm.
know how to do it. I didn't
Yeah.
know there was a way for me to do it. I
Right.
didn't know that you could be ethical about it,
Okay.
because the world and society and people, they drill this idea in your head that you have to be a certain way,
Yes.
you know. But then when
One
you discover
partner, get
all
married,
this,
have kids. Yeah.
it's like that domino effect that you were talking about earlier. One thing takes to another, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, like I have
Yeah.
opened my eyes. This
Yeah.
is me, and I'm like now proud and loud as much as possible about it.
Yeah.
So I can identify with your eye-opening moment that you had as well.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that's really cool about, like, this LGBTQI plus community, is the fact that I think our community challenges a lot of these social norms. So it's kind of like society does tell you, like, you must have one partner, you must marry them, you must have kids. And obviously, like, being polyamorous, it's like totally going, actually, you know what, that doesn't work for me. And the same with people who are asexual, or, and again with people who are like non-binary and going, actually, I'm not a man or a woman, and I'm gonna, explore my masculine side and my feminine side if they so do. It's I think we're a lot more open-minded with a lot of the kind of norms that just get shoved in front of us, that most cisgendered heterosexual people never even challenge. They never even think about the alternatives. Whereas we're like, hey, not only do we think about the alternatives, we embrace them and we're much happier for them. So
Yeah,
yeah,
totally. I think everybody just needs to focus on themselves. They just need to focus on love, and love, and love the ones that are around you, instead of actually creating this environment that's not gonna bring anything good. In the end, when they actually open their eyes, and hopefully someday they would do, they're gonna
yeah,
realize that all of the things that they did or they trying to do, they didn't mean anything. We are still here fighting this fight. We're not gonna go anywhere.
yeah, for sure. I think the blueprint that's been put down for people just needs tearing up, and a new one needs to be put down. Like,
I have been thinking about that, and I'm like, when is this gonna be that turning point in humanity, when we
mm,
actually clean that slate and start from zero, but that zero is gonna be the now, today,
yeah,
and then say, hey, this is okay, and from now on, everybody that's gonna be born from now on,
yeah,
has to be exposed to this, because this is normal, this is fine, this is okay, this is who we are, and
yeah.
stop making it like a taboo or something wrong. Stop
Or
doing that.
seeding as well. I find, when you have some parents who don't want their children learning about like LGBT relationships, like they imply that it's seedy and that it's an adult subject, or gender's an adult subject.
You're already making
no,
it a problem and a bad thing when it isn't. Just educate yourself. Just
yeah,
do that. You're gonna discover so much.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. We are out of time. Do you have any last words for the ones listening? Maybe something that you want to talk that we didn't discuss or I didn't ask you, or any last advice words?
I guess I'd say, I don't know. I think if you're unsure about your gender and you're stressing about it and worrying about it, just remember that there's no rush. There's no deadline to figure out who you are. You may never figure out who you are, and that's okay. And
That's
just
the beauty. You can change, and then
like the labels change, the way you present changes. Like it can be very fluid. So you don't need to, if you want to figure it out, of course, like go and do research, talk to people, but just remember that you don't have to come to a definitive answer. And even if you want to, just let it happen naturally and try not to put too much pressure on yourself. Like you'll get there in the end. So that would kind of be my message for the people out there who are perhaps like questioning their gender. And then I guess my message for cisgender people would be, learn about your cisgender privilege. Just like there's male privilege, white privilege, learn about your cisgender privilege and how you can use it for the greater good to help trans and gender diverse people.
Definitely. Well, there you have it. Thank you very much, Phil, for your time and for your words and for sharing so openly your experience with all of us. And I'm looking really forward to publish this very soon.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or want to stay in touch, you can find me on Instagram at My Queer Family Podcast. Until next time.